number one is a little further back. So this is referring to the Giants era in the 1990s when they were under Bill Parcells. So my question is, what if Bill Belichick ended up being the successor to Bill Parcells in 1991 instead of, kind of going to Cleveland and then going to New England? And the Giants were pretty bad in the early 90s, after that Parcells era. So, after that, they won the Super Bowl in 1990. Bill Parcells left. And the GM at the time, George Young, didn't really like Bill Belichick. He kind of thought he was a little weird and he cussed too much, which is true. He's a weird guy who probably cusses a lot. But eventually they named someone else as the successor to Bill Parcells, and they go through some lean years while Bill Belichick goes on to, lead one of the greatest dynasties of all time in New England. So my what if is, what do you think happens if Bill Belichick ends up in New York? Does he stay there long enough to, be able to build up another dynasty? And is he the same type of, all-time great GOAT level coach in New York?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question kind of comes down to, like we were talking before with Eli and Rivers, like it comes down to personality. Like, I know you're from the Bay Area, but I'm sure you're familiar with what it takes in a big market, being in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's something to the fact that Belichick thrived in New England. Like, although it is Boston, it's kind of like when they took over, the Pats were kind of like second or third fiddle to the Sox and to the Celtics. And he kind of was
the
able
Bruins, they might have been fourth fiddle in that time, at that time at least.
Yeah, and like he was kind of able to create this dynasty, at least in the formative years, like a little more quietly. Like, to make it in New York, you got to be a certain type of player, a certain type of coach. You got to be able to take a lot. He lasted about 3 days in New York. I think even less, like 24
Jets,
hours.
Right?
Yeah, with that famous situation with the Jets. And, from what we've seen through the last, I guess, 25 years with Belichick, he's definitely not exactly the friendliest guy with the media, doesn't have the most patience in the world. And to make it here, you really got to be a man of the people. Like, even like recent, like just looking at Dayball, like he's just like a friendly teddy bear. Like, media loves him. And I want to say he's been successful in New York because last year was great. This year is kind of like a mini disaster.
Like the year from hell, yeah.
Yeah, I think he'll survive it. But for Belichick, I think he doesn't have the brashness, the personality that a Parcells had or a Coughlin had, where he kind of lays down the law. He's like more mild-mannered a little bit or to himself. And I think that would have, he thrived as a defensive coordinator, and the guys like Banks and Carson and LT, they all loved him. But the head coach is a different animal than the defensive coordinator. And I think it would have kind of mixed it up if he started as a head coach. And, not sure it would have became a dynasty in New York, but then definitely probably would not have, Robert Kraft would not have seen anything in him to hire him for the Patriots, and the dynasty that we know of as the Patriots would been.
Yeah. I think the key point that you brought up was the personality. I think that I don't know if the New York media would have given him the time to build things up in New York the way that he got time in New England, because like we said, I mean, the Patriots now, they're elite franchise, all the stuff, 6 rings, but back then, third, maybe fourth fiddle. People didn't really care about the Pats. I want to say they were going to move to Hartford at some point, or they were going to move somewhere else. So it got to the point where people just, because they never won, people didn't care about the Patriots. So they kind of flew under the radar, even though they were in this, one of the biggest media markets in the country. So I don't know if he gets the same patience in New York, but I do think what I feel he did in New England was kind of take that Bill Parcells identity and those Giants teams of being super tough and disciplined and defense focused. I think all of that would have carried on, and you would have just been able to continue that in New York. And then obviously the question mark is if he gets the quarterback that he needs. So that's the
right.
kind of what if on top of the other what if is if he gets the quarterback that he needed, then yeah, I think he's successful in New York. Or really successful in New York. But even without that, I think he would have been competitive, at least just because he's just a defensive genius, and that part, at least on that side of the ball, would have been taken care of. But obviously, he doesn't get Brady, so he's not
Yeah,
maybe not the
the
GOAT
narrative's
coach,
kind of
but
shift on him, right? Because
yeah.
you're looking at the Pats now. The whole thing was like, were they a dynasty? Was Belichick great because of Brady, or was Brady great because of Belichick? Right? Like you have. I know this isn't a Patriots podcast, but you
Hmm.
have that one season where Brady blows out his knee and Matt Castle takes them to 11-5, and you're like, all right, Belichick's a genius. Like it's all the system.
Hmm.
But Brady leaves to Tampa. The Pats haven't made the playoffs since, and it's kind of all unraveling. Like I even saw reports that Belichick's leaving and going to the Chargers next year or something like
Oh,
that.
wow.
So, the story for Belichick, I feel like the end of his career is going to be like, was he great because of Brady? And I guess we'll never know. Like that's a great what if. We'll
Hmm.
never know.
Yeah, and actually, we plan to cover that at some point. Me and my co-host, we're going to do a "Death of the Patriot Way" podcast, just because, for better or worse, it's over. The Patriot Way, as
Yeah,
we know
for
it,
sure.
it's ending, in New England if Bill Belichick leaves, and it's ended in Oakland or in Las Vegas because Josh McDaniels got fired. He's probably never going to get another job. So yeah, it's an interesting what if that you can dig deep, and there's a lot of layers about who was ultimately responsible for what. I think just like my elevator, pitch about it is it was symbiotic. One was great because the other was great, and they just kind
Yeah,
of pushed each other to greatness. And they ended up breaking up because they couldn't sustain the relationship much longer. But I think they pushed each other to greatness,
for
essentially.
sure.